Hello, everybody. Today we are welcoming Kate onto the show. Thank you for joining us today, Kate.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to join you.
It's great to have you here. And really, what we'd love is for you to just briefly introduce yourself before we dive right into the episode.
Absolutely. My name is Kate Woolsey, and I'm a holistic wellness coach. I'm an American who's currently based in the Netherlands, and I help people deal with stress and overwhelm so that they can find alignment, balance, and bliss in their lives.
Awesome. So share with our listeners a little bit about your background, your story. Like, what has led you to where you are?
That's a great question. So I actually started out in healthcare. I was in healthcare leadership positions for 12 years in the US, and I achieved a lot of success in those positions, but I was not particularly fulfilled fully in all of them. And I could tell that I was a little bit out of alignment in certain positions that I held, and the stress of them kept building. I was developing anxiety, stress. I was going sort of like a pendulum from work, which was a bit overwhelming and stressful, even though I was successful and had great positions and great opportunities. And then, when I had a chance to take a break, I would be shopping or drinking champagne out with my friends, kind of the pure opposite, right? Of just kind of escaping into pleasure and just things like that. I was just getting out of balance, and I knew that there must be something more. And eventually the burnout just got a little bit too much, and I took a break. I had an opportunity when I moved to Philadelphia with my fiance. I just switched jobs. I took a break, and then I got introduced to the holistic wellness world. I met with nutritionists. I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, all sorts of natural healers and things like that. And that's when my journey really shifted. And I started into the world of getting more aligned and things like that.
I love that. So many people listening can resonate, I'm sure, with kind of that feeling of that pendulum swinging. Like you said, I can totally relate to it. When I was working in kind of the corporate fitness space, I was in quite a senior leadership position, flying all over different countries and trying to manage myself as well as these facilities and the people in them. And there was something that wasn't aligned. There was something that I knew. It's just a feeling that you have that I think is a little signal that we ought to be listening to. And I think when we start to listen to it, pretty cool things start to happen, don't they? So what, how and why are you showing up in the way that you are now for other people? Like, why didn't you go back into that corporate space? Like, what was it that gave you that bug of the holistic wellness space?
I think that I noticed how differently I felt. It was night and day. When I started taking care of myself, when I shifted the foods that I was eating, what I was showing up for myself, and like really digging into my own emotions and finding that that was actually a really comfortable and safe place for me to be, that really shifted my ability to show up in the world and what I wanted out of my day-to-day life. Because I think when our minds and our bodies are in that right space, it's a lot easier to notice when our daily activities fit that or they don't fit that. And so for me, it's just been the pursuit of my purpose, finding the things that really light me up, that I feel very aligned to. And it turns out that's really helping other people to find that as well.
Awesome. Alignment. I know obviously for me, alignment is just so key to make sure everything that you're doing internally, externally is aligned, because it just makes things so much more effortless. And like you said, you start to see much better results in every area of your life. And one thing, obviously, you've spoken about alignment a lot, and one thing that we know that you focus a lot on as well as bliss. It's like a big part of what you do. So why is bliss and alignment, like these two things, why is there such a focus point for you and what you do?
That's a great question. For me, those have been really the signals and the leaders that have pulled me through to creating a life that really feels fulfilling and joyful. And for those listening that are not familiar with my work, I talk a lot about bliss, as you mentioned. And I just want to clarify, I don't necessarily think of bliss as perfect happiness and joy, but rather, like you were just talking about, Jonathan, where it's that alignment of the internal matching the external. and really living that experience from the inside out, where we are not filtering ourselves and we're really honoring and celebrating who we are, the good, the bad, the in between, all of that. I think that's when we really feel what I call bliss, that feeling of just kind of your body's buzzing, you feel very excited, you feel very alive, you feel even in the moments that are really, really difficult, you have this underlying knowing that this is where I'm meant to be. And there's a lot of comfort, I feel like, in that.
There's an element of safety to it as well, isn't there? When you have that layer of trust that actually, do you know what, I'm where I'm supposed to be. It doesn't have to be all sunshine and rainbows. It's about that full spectrum of the human experience. So I love your definition of that so much in terms of bliss, because there's a lot of connotations around bliss, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think in our society in general, right, we think of happiness or joy or bliss or things like that. We kind of hold them on this pedestal of, oh, that's a luxury, or when things are a certain way. And it's just, I think it's really right now, it's accessible to all of us. It's not a luxury. It's a birthright. It's something that exists within all of us. And it's just an opportunity for us to access and tap into and honor that and help, let it guide us sort of as we make choices throughout the day and throughout our lives.
It is like that internal compass, I feel. And I think when we listen to that and we actually honor that, we can actually start to not only make a difference for ourselves, but society as a whole. And I'm curious, before we kind of go there, is what kind of barriers do you think stop people from accessing that bliss and that true alignment for themselves?
That's a great question. I think, as you mentioned, society kind of has a specific path that they roll out for us. And these are the traditional markers of success, or these are the types of things that lead to happiness. And I think a lot of people may not actually find fulfillment or joy or bliss in that, but it takes a lot of strength or awareness to kind of recognize that and then to step away from it. I think some people just have that innately. They know that that's not for them. And I think they have a very easy time following their path. For a person like me, I thought that was the right thing to do, right? So for me, it's embracing that uncertainty. It's stepping away from that fear of what if I don't follow this path, or what will happen? I don't know. I think self-doubt is something that we struggle with when we're trying to really listen to the inner voice. And I mean, obviously people also feel guilty. We don't have time. We have a hard time setting those boundaries for ourselves. And that can be another barrier that folks experience.
Yeah, 100%. I really resonated there when you said about like that inner voice. And I think definitely listening and having that layer of self-doubt and almost judgment over that inner voice can be a huge barrier, but also not even being aware of that inner voice. And that's something I wasn't for a long time. I wasn't really aware of what was going on inside my mind in terms of that internal chatter. And I ended up living a life that I thought I should, rather than one that genuinely lit me up. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's so common. What would you say to somebody that's maybe listening to this and they're thinking, oh, this inner voice, should I be listening to it? Like, what is it? Like, how can I almost overcome this barrier to find my bliss?
That's a great question. I think it starts with that inner voice. Those are the whispers. Those are the signals that kind of help pull you towards the things that light you up. And I think the more we listen to them, the more we hear them, and the more we see them in terms of the synchronicity that kind of lights up all around us. And you're like, oh, wow, things become a little bit easier. You recognize that you're in the flow of the universe and the rhythm of life. But it's not always easy. And sometimes those whispers, when we ignore them, become a shout. Like I told you, I had kind of stepped away and things, but I thought I was smarter than that. I thought I could have all of the things. I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's. I changed my life. I was feeling better. I got restless. I had become a yoga teacher, but I was like, I want something else. I jumped back into healthcare, right? And I had this whisper that said, no, don't do this. Don't do this. But I was like, I'm smart. I can outsmart it, right? And it didn't take that long. Like, no, I couldn't. I ended up having a miscarriage that was really devastating for me, right? But it cracked me open again in that way where I was flooded with emotions. I was flooded with all of that. I really couldn't ignore it anymore. And again, like I had to go back to all my natural healing and back to the inner work of really deciding what kind of life I wanted. I knew I wanted to be a mother, and I knew that it wasn't going to magically happen if I didn't really take ownership of that and create the life that was fulfilling for me.
What does that taking ownership mean to you?
For me, taking ownership really means accepting myself, acknowledging that inner voice imperfectly, moving forward, and putting myself in the flow of my purpose and my passions and what lights me up, instead of prescribing to what society tells me that I should do and just going with that. Because I don't think that really is the flow. I think that is one path that we've seen that I think so many people are really finding that it's not particularly fulfilling, and they're really trying to find their way out of that and find their way into something that suits them better. And that's a hard place to be, but it's really worth it, and it's something that we continue. It's not like, oh, I left that job, so my life is perfect, or, oh, now I work in wellness and my life is great. It's like, no, it's a choice I make every day over and over. I'm sure you guys both know. It's not like it just magically happens.
Yeah, definitely. I spent years in a position feeling very unfulfilled, doing everything I thought I had to do to be where I was supposed to be in terms of my health, my fitness, my wellness, my work, my career. And there was always something missing. There was fulfillment. It was never fulfilled. And because I was always chasing something externally that I didn't actually want, but I didn't realize at the time. It's kind of like your story. You said when you had internally, you were going, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And then externally, you were fighting against it and doing it anyway. And that's what I was doing for years. The same thing is just internally, there was messages going wrong. I wasn't listening to that inner voice. I was just cutting it off, putting literally like a brick wall up and just going on doing what I think needed to be done and never feeling fulfilled. And when I got to the point where I started to realize that and started to go in the direction that made me become more fulfilled, that's when the internal and external started to match up more. But that doesn't mean that everything was like sunshine and roses. It doesn't mean that everything was like I was positive all the time. I was happy all the time. I was energized all the time, because that wasn't always the case. But that's not the purpose of fulfillment or like bliss. Is not to be 100% happy, positive, calm, relaxed every single second of the day. You've got to go through those different levels of emotions and those different experiences to be and like you said, is to accept it. And it's not bad, it's not good, it's just what we experience. And it's okay to go through all those different experiences, okay to feel all those different things and feel up and feel down, feel neutral. All these it's part of being a human being, and it's part of accepting who you are and obviously feeling aligned and feeling blissful as well. It's okay to be in situations where you might not feel great, but you can still feel appreciative and accepting of what's happening. You can learn from it, definitely, and that will help you grow. And it's like becoming aligned and like feeling blissful. It's not, or experiencing bliss. It's not a process. It's not a destination. It's like you said, like you make the decision every day to do what you do, or to feel how you want to feel, or to experience what you want to experience. So if you want to be happy, you just got to be happy. You make the choice, regardless of what's going on around you. It might be hard sometimes, like you said, but the more you do it, it becomes easier and more aligned with what you want, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so beautifully said. I absolutely agree. The example that I think of is I moved when I was like out of college. I took my first job. I moved from Wisconsin to New England, and I used to just cry a lot. I'm like a very sensitive and emotional person. And so we'd be having dinner and I just kind of burst into tears and didn't think much of it. But I knew that I was in the right place And so it wasn't like I was really sad. Like I missed my family and I was going through something and I knew I was shifting and changing and stuff. But like there was this knowing of just, I'm spreading my wings. I have to go further. I'm meant to be here. And I think those are the types of things that really get you through those experiences, even though they're uncomfortable, even though they're sad, even though they're emotional. You know, you've got that core kind of reassuring you and grounding you to the fact that you're in alignment, which makes it worth it, you know?
What if somebody's listening to this and they can't relate to what you mean by there's a knowing and a sense of reassurance there? Because that's something that sometimes we're unaware of. Sometimes it's something that people think is far too distant from where they are now. So if we was to meet a listener where they are, and they're like, what's this sense of knowing all about? What would you say?
I think I used to be that way. Or there've been many times in my life where I've been that way, where instead of listening to my inner voice, I was listening to everybody else instead. And I was like, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? And everybody's like, oh, you'll know it. It's like when they say you're going to fall in love, like you just know it when you feel it. And you're just like, this can't be. Like, tell me something tangible, tell me something more real. And that was definitely me as well. I think I've heard this voice for a long time. It doesn't mean I've listened to it, right? I've tuned into other frequencies and other things instead of that. I think we can experiment with that. If you're not sure, if you hear your inner voice, pay attention in the little things. Like when you're going to pick out your socks in the morning, which ones do you want? Which ones match your mood? You know, like it's not really like that big of a deal, but you might notice like, oh, I feel like expressing myself this way or that way, you know? And I think those little things of just starting to tune in and starting to ask the question and starting to experiment with it really helps show you that like, oh, it's there. There is this inner knowing. And the thing is, it's like, there's no right or wrong. It's not like you're going to wear the wrong socks, right? You're going to just wear the ones that you choose that day that reflect your inner creativity for the moment that you're in. There's no right or wrong answer to it. It's just experiencing that and building that relationship, you know?
Yeah, I love that you describe it as a relationship as well, because it is that, isn't it? It's because when you have a relationship, there's a strong foundation. You have that sense of trust once again, and that trust gives you a sense of knowing. There's a sense of safety and security within that as well. Is it safe to say that from almost your model of the world, when we connect with that bliss and that alignment, that sense of knowing shows up if we wasn't aware of it already?
I think so. I think it's like a relationship, right? Like you just said, I think the more we tune into it, the more we see it. I think the more we show up for ourselves, the more the universe starts to show up for us. I mean, for example, the day that I went into labor with my daughter was the day we found out we were moving to the Netherlands. We were en route to the hospital and like my husband gets the phone call like, yep, you've got the job. You're going to be moving to to the Netherlands. And I was like, okay, can't deal with that at the moment, you know, but it was like, then flash forward a day and I'm in the hospital room with my baby, just found out we're moving to Europe. And I was like, oh my gosh, like who does this happen to? This is just amazing. But I had just done all of this work, right? I had just done all of this inner work from the time that I had the miscarriage to healing myself, to really digging into the pregnancy then that I was fortunate enough to have, to realizing just because I'm pregnant doesn't mean there's going to be a baby. I mean, it's just, you really are developing this relationship, trying to figure out what you want and what would suit you and how to show up and kind of like fighting to protect that, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, these gates just opened, you know, and it was crazy. It was like, we found out we're moving. We sold our condo to the very first people that saw it. We were like off in just a little bit of time. And like, you know, the week she turned 1 was the week we arrived in the Netherlands. And it's like, you know, there's just all these little details that go with it, but it's like, that's not an accident. It's like, those are the things that strengthen your relationship with your inner knowing and with your alignment and all of these things, right? You get not just these little examples, which I think are wonderful and so important, these little whispers and these little synchronicities that pop up, but then all of a sudden it's like the floodgates just open and you're like, oh, wow, I'm really going downstream now. I'm really just like on the roller coaster that I'm meant to be on. And it's, and it was frightening and exhilarating all at the same time. But I also then had this knowing of like, okay, I put myself here. I asked for this. Obviously, like there's a momentum here that's much bigger than me. There must be something to it,
One of the things that I was going to ask you shortly was like, what's the consequences when somebody finds that bliss, or when they really connect with that bliss? I always say connect because I feel like we shouldn't find bliss. Like it's not like something we lost somewhere. It's like it's always there. Right?
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
But anyways, like in terms of what's the consequences when we connect with that bliss, I think you've just answered that already quite nicely, where you said like gates open, suddenly we realize that we're in this place. But is there anything else you'd add in terms of what's the consequences when somebody finds their bliss?
I mean, I think it just lights you up. I think it makes you glow from the inside out. I think you become magnetic for other people and the things that you're looking for. I think you get more and more clarity around the things that are really aligned for you. It becomes easier to kind of filter out what's meant for you and what isn't, I think it's just like anything. It's like the more we practice it and the more we see evidence of it and the more we learn to trust it, especially when things become difficult, it's like you have this touchstone that's there that you can kind of hold on to, that you know who you are in a situation, or you can tap into who you are and access that, so that when things become challenging, you can always refer to that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And one thing I'd obviously love to know, and from your standpoint experience, is a lot of people experience stress, anxiety, tension on a daily basis. And probably when they're in that situation and they're in that feeling that every single day, they struggle to see the silver lining. So to anyone listening who may be experiencing stress, anxiety, tension, anything like that in their life right now, and they want to know is, okay, how can I experience bliss right now? What would you say to them?
I've got two things I would say to them. The first one is, what is this feeling trying to tell you? And just hold that question, when you're driving, when you're walking your dog, just when you're in the shower, just, is there something here that I should be learning or listening to? What's the message that I'm, getting? And the second one is, this is where I really recommend meditation and things like that, because when we're in that stress response of that fight or flight, one of the best ways to turn it off is to activate our relaxation response. And this can happen through meditation, through deep breathing and things like that. And so to kind of pull ourselves out of that stress, we can activate our relaxation response. And that's like the fastest way to kind of shift how you're physically feeling. And I think that helps you then create the space and the grounding that you need to even consider what bliss means to you in that moment,
Yeah, definitely. It's something we preach so much about, is that people like in that situation, the quickest return is like your breath and meditation. A couple of minutes can bring you back down into a more resourceful state, which then that whole concept of experiencing bliss becomes more it becomes an option then, instead of being in the stress environment thinking, oh, I can't be happy, I can't be this, I'm too stressed, I'm too anxious. So even just a couple of minutes of breathwork meditation can put you in a much more resourceful state to consider that option, that there is another way to approach it. So yeah, definitely very, very, very powerful on that one. And I think when people start to become more resourceful in their thinking, they can start to realize that, okay, I can experience bliss. I don't need to feel this way, and I don't need to see stress or anxiety as a problem, because or as something that's happening to me, but it's something that's happening for me if I learn from it and learn to actually become aware of it and what's happening. And like you said, to understand the feelings and the emotions are attached to whatever's happening at that moment. Because the more you become aware of it, it's easier to then to deal with and process it, and then to, like you said, switch out of that that stress state, out of that fight or flight response, and into a much more relaxed state where you can make more resourceful decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think learning to just accept ourselves and our experiences as they are is one of the most profound and useful things that we can do. You know, even if that's a state of stress, it's just like, okay, this is my circumstance right now. This is what it is. You know, it doesn't make me less of a person. It doesn't make me anything. You know, it's just, this is where I'm at, and this is the opportunity that I'm given at this moment. How do I want to move forward?
It's amazing how quickly, in my personal experience anyway, that I found is when I actually stopped resisting it and like being and staying in that stress state and almost choosing it, I noticed the stress would dissolve so quickly. It's like when I just actually stop getting involved with it and just take a step back, immediately there's a sense of relief. And immediately there's just this different world opens up almost.
That to me is the bliss that you're, you know, it's like rather than engaging in the world outside, like you just described, and all the things you should be feeling and should be dramatizing and all that, to then step it backward into yourself. And it's like, oh, okay, here I am. You know, it's not so bad here. I can handle this. I am in control here. Yeah.
One of the things that we always talk about here at Wellness Theory, and something we're moving even more into, is like when we let go of unhealthy stress and we actually start to leverage our wellness and how we feel, we actually suddenly show up, like you said earlier, just so alive, that we actually then have so much more to give and so much more to offer. And that's something that Wellness Theory, we're on a bit of a journey, obviously personally and professionally ourselves, and we are moving more into, you know, how does this impact humanity on a much bigger level? So we're very much aligning with, you know, the big global goals and global issues out there. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Have you noticed with the clients that you work with, actually when they almost get past this place of stress or anxiety almost, like what does that unlock for them?
Oh my gosh. The possibilities are just endless, right? And I think it's beautiful to see it. You know, it's like when we stop judging ourselves and we accept ourselves for who we are, where we are, we can make totally different decisions and choices. We use our resources differently and our time differently because we choose then the things that honor us. And I think in effect, we do things that honor those around us. When we show up for ourselves, we're better able to show up for the people around us. You know, I think we're able to take on some of those issues and things like that. And I think we're raising the global consciousness in a way, right? We are breaking away from that systemic way that we should be doing it. And we're empowering people to live the lives that are meant for them outside of that system, which traditionally has been very oppressive for lots of groups of people. So I think that's an important thing on a global level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As our consciousness continues to evolve, are there any causes that you support and that you really feel like, you know, that these issues for you personally are ones that really need our attention on a society level?
I'm very concerned about what's happening with the children and the immigrants in the United States. I think that's been something that's been very deeply disturbing and upsetting for me, you know, to picture what it's like for those mothers to have their children ripped out of their arms, or for have, you know, these young children not know where their families are. I think that's devastating. And I don't think that there's any reason that that should be happening. I'm also very anti-racism is something that I'm very committed to, and watching the gun violence epidemic and the systemic oppression of Black, Indigenous people of color in the US and throughout the world is a real issue that is very close to my heart and something that I value in my business and pay very close attention to where I give my resources and things like that, and who I choose to hire and the causes that they support as well.
Beautiful.
Nice.
And that one of the reasons I ask you that as well is because sometimes we can be so consumed with our own selves and our own stress that we can lose sight of some of those things. And that's why I really wanted to kind of ask you personally what effect that has for you and how you almost pay that forward and make a difference. So here's another little question for you. So when you align with yourself and you've got this sense of bliss, how do you leverage that to then go and impact causes such as the ones you just described?
I think it is reflected in the choices, right? Of who you collaborate with and who you spend your time with. The fact that you are trying to be accessible to different groups of people, that you're paying attention to the fact that there are these different barriers, that there are different privileges that I'm afforded that other people may not be, and that you're building that into your business and how you deal with your clients and how you deal with your peers, the coaches myself that I hire. I think it's a really challenging thing because in a lot of ways I feel very small when it comes to these types of issues. And so it becomes really overwhelming sometimes to think about how I can make a difference or how we're really going to move the needle on these huge issues in a really meaningful way. And every time I can be myself instead of falling in line with the patriarchy, that is a step forward, but it doesn't feel like a big one. Do you know what I mean? It's a challenge for me as well. I mean, I think it's just, these are the issues of our time and they are critical. And as a business owner, I think we have to take responsibility for making sure that our work is accessible to people all over, of all different means and things like that, that we are informing ourselves of what's happening and how to be true allies in these causes. But it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I can totally relate when you say like it's overwhelming, because I feel like such a small cog in the wheel when you're trying to make that impact. But like you quite rightly said earlier, is actually when we work on ourselves, our global consciousness evolves, and it's the same with those choices that you make every day. And clearly everything that you're already doing, how self-aware you are, how business aware you are in terms of like the choices that you make and the people you hire and who you're aligning yourself with, that's all making such a big impact and having a ripple effect. And I just hope anybody listening to this can start to see, okay, well, actually, if I work on myself, it's actually one of the most selfless things I can do, because no matter how big or small the impact is that we can have, it's still an impact. It doesn't matter if you're, raising millions for causes, or whether you're just making a choice that day to be more mindful of these situations and actually put your best foot forward and do your best to speak about things, raise awareness about things, and everybody can do that no matter where they are, I believe.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
I was basically trying to say something very, very similar. Is like so many people, they just think, oh, this stuff needs to be done about all these global issues that are happening, but I need to sort my own life out. I don't know what to do for myself. And then when they do find or kind of get to that point where, okay, I'm ready to help somebody, they don't know what to do. They feel overwhelmed. There's so much going on. But like you rightly said, is if people just start to understand who they truly are and show up as their true selves, that will impact the people around them without them having to do anything else. That will start to influence the people around them just by them putting that one step forward and being who they truly are and living their true selves, and not just thinking about themselves, but actually looking after themselves so they're able to look after others around them. I think that's the biggest impact that like an individual can have around the people around them, because how you show up influences the people around you. And if they take from that and thinking, oh God, this person is full of energy, they're vibrant, they really care, then that will influence maybe a small percentage of the people around them. And then that might affect change in them. And they'll look up for themselves, and that will affect change in others and also have that ripple effect. So I think if people stop looking on how can I solve a huge thing like world hunger, for example, instead of thinking, okay, let's start small and how can I affect the people around me who can then affect the people around them, and then it just ripples from there, then that will become less overwhelming and more, I think it's a lot more well, easy and I think like relaxed for people to actually do, and to go out there and think, okay, like I can make a big impact by starting small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely. I mean, I think, Mother Teresa said, if you want to make a change, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways it's very true. Like we have to make sure that we are living as part of the solution and not part of the problem. We have to make sure that the causes that we give our resources to are supporting the things that align with our values, that we make sure that the things in our home, that the books that our kids read and the dolls that they play with reflect the diversity that we want them to see and accept and understand in the world. These are small things, but they do make a big change. And I also think, the more we become aligned with ourselves, the clearer our values are, then the easier it becomes to speak up and to speak out and to take action and move quickly when we're needed to help advocate and make changes in these situations. It's a hard time right now.
It is. At the same time, there's good people out there that are wanting to make that difference. And I think finding their bliss and finding that alignment is a beautiful place to start if that is someone's starting point. So that being said, if you could give one piece of like practical advice to anybody listening, or maybe it's even something you do with your clients. I know you have like the Bliss in 6 as well. If you want to touch upon that, like what would you suggest to somebody that's listening that maybe wants to find their bliss?
I would say start small and start listening to yourself. Start listening, start inquiring, start asking questions about how you're feeling, and then just observe that. Just let it be as it is and practice, having that conversation internally, practice letting it be the way that it is, practice accepting yourself the way that you are now. I think those are small things that we can do multiple times per day, easy. And they end up compounding to make a bigger influence in our relationship that we're developing with ourselves, with the way that we accept ourselves and the way that we then show up in the world. The Bliss in 6 that you just mentioned is a program that I offer that are guided meditations that are about 6 minutes or less. And they're all about helping people to tap into that quickly, both to shut off that stress response of that anxiety and activate their relaxation response, but then also to inquire and to start that conversation and to start the steps towards self-acceptance, alignment, and bliss.
Beautiful.
Awesome. So obviously, the next question I want to ask you, I think I might know what the answer might be after listening to everything you've been saying, but like, I'm really interested to know what habit or behavior or belief has really made the biggest impact on your life over the last 5 years?
Meditation. Going inward, however that looks to you. There's no one right way to do it. It could be a walk in nature. It could be painting. It could be going for a run. It can be laying in your bed and just closing your eyes and tapping into your body. I mean, I think just the more we develop that relationship with ourselves, the more we allow ourselves to speak unfiltered, the more we accept that, the closer we get to our bliss.
That's exactly what I thought your answer was. Sitting inward, definitely.
I love it. And like, we're so in congruence with that as well. Like we love it when people come on our podcast as well and almost echo some of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes.
Yeah.
I remember when I was on like at the beginning of my personal development journey, I would hear things like yeah, all right, maybe that's for them. But then I'd hear like a few people say it and then more and then more and then more. And I'm like, okay, maybe there's something to this. So I love it comes up again. I think it's brilliant. So yeah. Listen, Kate, we've loved having this conversation with you so far. Are there any final words, anything else you'd like to add to this conversation that we haven't covered already?
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so happy to be part of this conversation. I think we've got, a great opportunity here. The world is kind of cracking open in some ways, and to really make significant changes, it means we have to destroy the things that don't work so that we can rebuild in ways that do, so I think that works both on an internal level in terms of stepping away from things that don't suit us and rebuilding our day, rebuilding our life in a way that does. And also on a global level, some of these systems are very broken and it's time to fix them. And to do that, we're going to just have to destroy the things that don't work to rebuild them. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, so Kate, tell anyone who's listening of where they can find you. If they want to reach out to you, find out a bit more about, obviously, like your what you talk about, Bliss and Alignment, or your, obviously, Bliss and Six, where can people find you?
Absolutely. Thank you. I am on Instagram at bliss.bykate. And you can also find me at my website at katewoolseywellness.com.
Awesome. And we'll put all those links in the show notes as well for people.
Awesome. Yeah. And I will give your listeners, there's like a series of 3 free meditations that they can have as well. So I'll send the link for that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your time and energy today. It is clear that you are a force for good in this world. And thank you for that as well. So thank you so much.
Right back at you. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.